Hello fellow cinephiles, Film Guru here. So I'm yet again looking at a film from the 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. And today I'll be looking at a classic film, a film that was a childhood classic for me and still a film I really love and go back to time and time again, Back to the Future. This came out in 1985. It was co-written by Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale and directed by Robert Zemeckis. It stars Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, Leah Thompson, Crispin Glover, and a variety of others. The film really looks at the adventures of Marty McFly and Doc Brown, these unlikely friends who come together and share adventures and inspire each other, and Doc's sort of a mentor to Marty in many ways. When we open up on the film, there's this panning shot that goes through and it establishes everything we really need to know about the story in the first 5-10 minutes of the film. We see there's a lot of clocks ticking and different times on the clocks, which shows that the film's really going to be about time. And time's going to play a big component to the film. There's even a drawn cutout image of a young person hanging from a clock tower, which is an anchoring point that comes back later in the movie, which I really loved. It sort of comes back when Doc is trying to connect electricity for the lightning to hit the thing, to hit the car so Marty can go back to the future. And we see there's a lot of gadgets that, stuff that works, stuff that doesn't. So these are the things that Doc has built. And we also hear a news report, because the TV turns on, about uranium being stolen. They believe terrorists are responsible. This is something that comes back later in the film, which I really liked. Then we're introduced to Marty McFly. We're only seen from the feet down, and we see him push a skateboard along the ground. We establishes he's young, he's in high school, he's a skateboarder. And it goes on, it hits something under the bed, and we see this container that the uranium was in that Doc was using to fuel and to make his time machine run. And I really like that. That's a really great setup. And then we see that Marty's sort of a musician, he plays guitar, and it sort of really establishes him as this young guy. And we know so much about Doc without actually seeing him. We only hear his voice when he explains to Marty that the clocks were all put 30 minutes behind. And it's really about Marty going to school, and that he's really sort of really wants his band and him to play at the school dance. And there's auditions being held, and he plays, and they say he's too loud. But then this scene is mirrored later in the film, especially when he goes back into 1950, where he's actually playing guitar with a band at the dance, trying to get his mother and father together. I really liked that. I thought that was a great anchoring point. And the film is really filled with moments like that. It's a really well-written script that everything serves a purpose. And there's some great things that are happening that are introduced and paid off later in the movie, and I really love that. Then we're introduced to his girlfriend, and you see the relationship between the two. And then we see him at home. We see how his father sort of is pushed around by people that he works with, and we're introduced to Biff, who went to high school with Marty's parents and really pushed George around when they were in high school. And he sort of holds it over him a little bit. We see that Biff's crashed George's car. And we see that he's just treated poorly by this man. And we're introduced to Marty's mother, played by Leah Thompson, Lorraine, and we see that she's sort of a little overweight and a little unhappy. And we see that his home environment isn't really happy. It isn't something he inspires to do, and it's very hard for him. Ultimately, he's contacted by Doc Brown, who says to meet him at the Twin Pines Mall car park at 1 o'clock in the morning. There's something he wants to show him. So without asking any questions, Marty goes there, and this is where we're introduced to actually physically seeing Doc Brown, played by Christopher Lloyd. And we're introduced to the idea that he's built a time machine, a DeLorean, and the uranium in it helps it run. And he talks about the flux capacitor, and he sort of explains things in a simple way about what he's done and how it works. And I really like that. Then there's an experiment held where he puts his dog Einstein in the car, and he sends him 1 minute into the future, and then he comes back, and then we see how it all works. And the visual effects are okay. They're not perfect. They don't completely hold up like they used to, but I like the effects that they create, and I really think there's a practicality to it and old school visual effects, which I really liked. Ultimately, Doc is gunned down, and Marty goes back into 1955, where he crashes into this barn, and this family come out thinking he's an alien. There's a really great moment there. And it really looks at how he's just trying to get home. He's trying to find Doc from the 50s and explain who he is, and try and convince Doc that they were friends in the future and that he is from the future. And they devise a way to sort of try and get him home. But because uranium isn't made and easy to obtain in the 50s, he sort of feels stuck. It isn't until he pulls out a flyer that he received earlier in the film, talking about the exact time and date when the clock tower was struck by lightning. This sets up a timer that he has a week to live in the 50s because this lightning strike isn't going to happen for another week. And it looks at how him being there starts to change things and affect things in the future. Where his mother and father first met, he's the one who actually pushes George out of the road, nearly hit by a car. And then this is where he's introduced to his mother, who starts to have a crush on him and starts to fall in love with him, which is something he didn't want. And the uncomfortability of that and the strangeness of that sort of kind of really works. And it shows how he's ultimately just trying to get his parents together because of his interaction and them not getting together. The photo he has of him and his brother and sister starts to vanish, and the people in start to vanish, and it's really about him trying to get them together. But he's sort of having an impact on the 50s in a way he didn't expect. He's sort of trying to right some wrongs and trying to stay away from particular things and to make sure things go in the right direction. But due to his actions, George McFly ultimately becomes the hero of the piece, and he isn't pushed around by, when we get back to the future, he isn't pushed around by Biff anymore. He's sort of the more successful one over Biff, and Biff is kind of like sad and pathetic, and I kind of like that. It sort of changes up for a more positive outlook on their life and how life changes for Marty and his family once they get into the future. His brother and sister have jobs, and life's much easier for them. I really love the look and feel of this film. I love the 1950s look. I like the fact that it was a studio backlot that they shot on, that they made, how they made the town look in the 80s and then in the 50s. I love all the clothing in the 50s and the cars and the shop fronts and how they make them look like it's from that era. And there's things that are set up that we see subsequently in later sequels. This began as a standalone film to begin with. They weren't really going to do sequels, and they had a great idea for a sequel, which they sort of set up in this because they talk about how Doc wanted to go into the future, and at the start of the film he doesn't get to do that, and then he does in the later parts of the film, and then returns to explain to Marty that things have gone wrong with their kids. See where they could go with the sequel, and we definitely needed to go into the future, not the past, because they already set that idea up. And obviously we go back into the deep, deep past in the third one. But Zemeckis has this great way of crafting an interesting and fun story. He sort of uses minimal visual effects. This was before he went into too digital stuff, and it just felt fun and entertaining. And it's a great adventure. It's very humorous. I think Michael J. Fox was fantastic in it, who was a sitcom star at the time with Family Ties. And there was talk that because his conflicting schedules, that to begin with, he wasn't able to first become part of Back to the Future. So they hired Eric Stoltz, who saw a number of scenes. And when he came available, they sort of replaced Eric Stoltz, which I guess is sad, but Stoltz didn't quite, from what Zemeckis said, he didn't quite fit what they had in mind. And it's unfortunate that they had to replace him with Michael J. Fox. But Michael J. Fox is fantastic in this, one of his best roles. To come from TV and do a film like this catapulted him to stardom, which I really loved. He has really great moments in it. His relationship with Christopher Lloyd is really great on screen. They have great chemistry. You can see they're sort of friends. And Marty McFly and Doc Brown are great characters to see on screen, and the way that both of them play it is fantastic. I like the fact that they made a time machine out of the DeLorean. I thought that was a really clever thing to do. And I really liked how it all set up things. And the idea of time travel, how he simplified it. They have a time machine, they go back to this particular time. Things they do can affect the future. And it's about getting back to that and not trying to do things in the past that'll change the future too much. It's a simple way of doing time travel, and probably the best example of it without getting too complicated and trying to explain everything. It's very simple, basic, which I really, really liked. I like all the antics, I like the humor, I like the things the characters get up to. And it's just a really well orchestrated and made film that I'm a big fan of. Everyone's great in this, I think. Leah Thompson's really good. She gets to play an older version of Lorraine and a younger version. She's fantastic in both. Crispin Glover is solid as George McFly, as the older version, but also as the younger version. There's an awkwardness, a strangeness to him that really works for the character. And I like all the stuff in the 50s when you get to see him. He wants to be a science fiction writer, and he's not the person Marty thought he was. And I really like that. It sort of made him more interesting of character, and we see the layers. And I think that was Bob Gale's decision when he wrote this script, or co-wrote this script, was the idea that he'd often wondered what it would be like to go back and visit his father when he was a young man. and what sort of person he was. And that's sort of the catalyst for what ultimately became the script for Back to the Future, which I really liked. I think that's an interesting way, because I guess a lot of us do want to go back and see what our parents were like maybe when they were young. And like I said, I think Michael J. Fox is fantastic in the role and really suited it and did a really great job. But for me, the real standout here is Christopher Lloyd's Doc Brown. What a fascinating character. And Christopher Lloyd is fantastic in it. His character sort of feels part Einstein, part crazy scientist from Metropolis, a 1920s film. I really like that. It sort of adds an interesting element to him. And Christopher Lloyd's hilarious in it. There's a lot of moments where he doesn't say anything. It's just about his expressions, his eyes wide open, his weird mouth movements when things happen, his reaction to things, the craziness of the character. He's full of energy and sort of zany, I kind of like that, but he's not too zany. He just steals the movie. I really forgot how fantastic he is in this film. And he has some really great moments and some great chemistry with Michael J. Fox. And it's just interesting to see a character like this. It's probably one of the best characters I've ever seen created. And Christopher Lloyd did a brilliant job of bringing that character to life. This is a classic for a reason. It's more of a modern classic, I guess, even though it came out in the 80s. Most people have seen it. If they haven't seen it, they've heard about it. It's one of those classic trilogies up there with the Star Wars trilogy and the original trilogy of Indiana Jones. And it's just a film that many people go back to, including myself. I love it. I love to return to it. I enjoy watching the sequels as well. But I think it's a true classic. It's fantastic. It deserves its position in the 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die book, because it is just such a fantastic and fun ride. Anyway, that's all from me today. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit subscribe down the bottom. Follow me on Facebook. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movies.